The water skin was empty. Hagar turned it over anyway, waiting for one more drop that never came. Beside her, her son had stopped walking. Then he'd stopped talking. Now he was lying in the thin shade of a desert shrub, too weak to lift his head. She was watching her own child fade in a wilderness she never chose to be in. And this was not even the first time this family had cast her out into the sand. She couldn't stay and watch it happen. So she walked far enough away that she wouldn't have to see, sat down, and let herself finally break. "I can't watch my boy die," she said quietly, and the tears came like they'd been waiting years for permission. How did a servant girl end up here, alone, twice abandoned, still clinging to a promise God had made her years earlier? To understand that, we have to go back to where it all started, a tent in Canaan, and a desperate decision that would change her life forever. Her name was Hagar, and she was Egyptian, likely brought into Sarai's household during the years Abram and Sarai sojourned in Egypt. She had no husband, no property, no voice in the matters of the family she served. She was property herself in the eyes of the law of her time. And for years, that was simply the shape of her life. Then Sarai grew desperate. She was old. She had waited decades for a child God had promised her husband, a promise that their descendants would outnumber the stars, and nothing had come. No child. No sign the promise was even real anymore. And in the ancient world, a barren wife had one option left that custom allowed: give her servant to her husband and claim any child born as her own. So Sarai went to Abram. "The Lord has kept me from bearing children," she said. "Go to my servant. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Notice, Hagar was not asked. She was given. Her body, her future, her son not yet conceived, all of it decided in a conversation she wasn't part of. Abram, who had waited on God for 10 long years in Canaan, agreed, and Hagar conceived. For a moment, maybe the only moment of power Hagar would ever hold in that household, everything shifted. She was carrying the heir. She, the servant, held what her mistress could not produce, and something in her hardened toward Sarai. Scripture says she began to look on her mistress with contempt. It's easy to judge her for that. It's harder to imagine what it must have felt like to have spent years as property, invisible, and then suddenly to matter, to hold something no one else in that household could give. Maybe it went to her head, or maybe, for the first time, she simply stopped hiding what she felt. Sarai did not tolerate it. She turned on Abram. "This outrage is your fault. May the Lord judge between you and me." And Abram, the man who would become the father of a nation, the man history remembers as a giant of faith, gave the only answer that cost him nothing. "She is your servant. Do to her as you see fit." What Sarai saw fit was cruelty. The text says she dealt harshly with Hagar, the same word used elsewhere in Scripture for the affliction of slaves under Pharaoh. Whatever it was severe enough that a pregnant woman, alone, with nowhere to go and no one to protect her, chose the wilderness over the tent she'd known her whole life. She ran. Picture her, alone, pregnant, walking a desert road toward Egypt, toward the home she'd been taken from, toward anything but the family that had used her and then punished her for the position they'd put her in. No provisions, no plan beyond distance. And it's there, by a spring on the road to Shur, that something extraordinary happens. Something that had never happened before in the story of God and humanity. The angel of the Lord found her, not Abram, not Sarai, God himself in the wilderness, seeking out a runaway Egyptian slave girl who held no covenant, no promise, no claim on heaven's attention by any standard of that world. "Hagar," the angel said, and this detail matters more than it first appears. He called her by name. In the entire book of Genesis, This is the first time a divine messenger addresses a woman directly, and the first time God speaks a human being's name before they speak his. Servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going? I am fleeing from my mistress, she said. Nothing more, just the plain, exhausted truth. The angel's answer is hard to hear on the surface: return and submit to her. But it comes wrapped in something Hagar had never been given before, a promise spoken directly to her with no one standing in between. I will multiply your descendants so greatly they cannot be counted. You are pregnant, and you will bear a son. You will call him Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. Ishmael, God hears. Her son's very name would be a record of this moment, a permanent reminder that when a slave girl was abandoned in the wilderness with nothing, God noticed. Not Abram's household, not Sarai's plans, her. And then Hagar did something no one else in the book of Genesis had done before her. She gave God a name. You are El Roi, she said, the God who sees me. Truly, here I have seen the one who sees me. Think about the weight of that sentence. A foreign woman, enslaved, discarded, pregnant, and alone. And she is the one who names the character of God for the rest of Scripture to inherit. Not Abraham, not a priest, not a king, her. She went back. She bore her son. Abram, 86 years old by then, named him Ishmael himself, the name heaven had already chosen. And for a while, it seemed like the story might rest there. A hard chapter, but a healed one. It didn't rest. It was only the first wilderness.
I hope you are enjoying the video, and please tell me where you are watching from.
Years passed. The promise that once seemed impossible to Abraham and Sarah finally arrived in the most unlikely way. In their old age, long after any reasonable hope had faded, Sarah gave birth to a son of her own. Isaac. Laughter. The child God had spoken of all along. And in the joy of that birth, something old and unresolved resurfaced. Ishmael was a teenager now, maybe 16 or so, and at the celebration marking Isaac's weaning, Sarah saw him doing something with the boy. The text says he was mocking, or perhaps simply playing in a way that unsettled her. Whatever it was, it ignited a fear Sarah had likely carried for years, that Ishmael, the firstborn, might one day share in, or even claim, the inheritance meant for her son. She went to Abraham with an ultimatum. Get rid of that slave woman and her son. That woman's son will never share the inheritance with my son Isaac. Abraham was devastated. This was still his son. He had held him, raised him, loved him for 16 years. The text says the matter distressed him greatly, but God spoke to Abraham too, not to overrule his grief, but to settle it. Do not be distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you. It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned, and I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring. So Abraham rose early the next morning. He took bread and a skin of water, placed them on Hagar's shoulders, gave her the boy, and sent her away. No caravan, no servants, no protection for the journey, just bread, water, and a single mother walking into the wilderness of Beersheba with a son who was nearly a man, but still entirely dependent on her. And this is where we began. The water ran out. The bread was gone. And a woman who had once heard God speak her name now sat at a distance from her collapsing son, weeping because she could not bear to watch him die. She must have wondered in that moment whether El Roi, the God who sees, had stopped looking. Whether the promise made to her years earlier at that first spring had simply been a mercy for a different chapter, one that didn't reach this far. It hadn't stopped. He hadn't stopped seeing her. Scripture says God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven. The same pattern as before, the same intimacy, the same insistence on speaking her name. What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand. for I will make him into a great nation." And then, the detail that undoes you if you sit with it. God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water that had been there the entire time. She had not been abandoned in an empty wilderness. She had been standing beside provision she couldn't yet see, blind with grief and thirst and fear, until God opened her eyes to what was already there. She filled the skin, gave her son water, and they lived. The text tells us God was with the boy as he grew up. He became an archer, made his home in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother, the same woman who had once fled with nothing, chose a wife for him from her homeland, Egypt. The servant girl who was traded away, mistreated, cast out not once but twice, became the mother of a nation, just as God had promised her at that very first spring, before anyone else in her story had shown her a shred of mercy. Hagar never asked to be part of this story. She was given no choice at the beginning, and very little choice throughout. She was used, then blamed, given status, then stripped of it, sent away twice by the same family into the same kind of wilderness, carrying the same kind of fear. And twice, in the very worst moment, not before it, not after it, but in the middle of it, she was met, not by Abraham, not by Sarah, by the God who saw her when no one else in her story chose to. Maybe that's why her story has endured for thousands of years, retold long after the empires and household customs of her time have turned to dust. Because most of us, at some point, know what it feels like to be the one who was given away, overlooked, sent into a wilderness we didn't choose, wondering if anyone up there is paying attention at all. Hagar's answer to that question came first. Before Moses saw the burning bush, before Israel cried out from Egypt. A nameless servant girl, alone in the sand, looked at the God who found her and said the words that would outlast every king in her story. "You are the God who sees me," and he still does.